My name is Michael Theodore Lambert III. Let me give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in Atlanta, and I went to Catholic school, and I went to Christ the King grade school in Atlanta, the Archdiocese school, parochial school. Then I went to Marist, and actually after I finished at Marist in 1962, I was the class of 1962, the last class to graduate from downtown, by the way. I went to the Marist Seminary, 2 years in Bettendorf, Iowa, at St. Joseph's Manor, which was the humanities part of the formation. And then I went to the novitiate in Rhinebeck, New York. And I was there probably 3 months, and we were doing a retreat, and I went to the retreat master, the rector of the seminary, Father Lajoie. He was a French Canadian, and I told him, I said, Father, I don't think I have a vocation to be a Marist priest or to be a priest. And he didn't even take a breath. He said, I don't think you do either. So I was on the next train back to Atlanta, and I got back to Atlanta and talked to my dad, and my dad said, well, you got to get your degree. So he called up a friend of his who had just started the retreat center for the Jesuits out at the Spalding property on the river. And they got me into Spring Hill College with the Jesuits down in Mobile, Alabama. And I graduated from there in '67. I went to summer school to try to catch up. So during the summer between my junior and senior year in college, I came out of the student center, and in the lobby of the student center there was a Marine officer in his dress blues with a big sign that says, become a Marine officer, become a leader of men. And I had been following the Vietnam War. This was in 63, 64, 65, that era. And Time magazine, I was an avid reader of Time, and Time magazine was covering what was going on in Southeast Asia in a very positive manner. It was us against the communists. And they were publishing some of the atrocities that the communists were doing to the poor people of South Vietnam, or Vietnam. And Vietnam had already split when the French War was over in '54. It was split, North Vietnam, which was communist, and South Vietnam, which was allied with the United States and the other free countries of the world. So I said, I want to be part of that, the fight against communism. So when I walked across the student center and talked to that Marine officer and told him I was interested, and after the conversation I signed myself up for the platoon leader class, PLC, and that summer I went to 10 weeks at Quantico, Virginia, which was an enhanced OCS course. Went through that, came back and finished up and graduated with a diploma in history and also a commission as a second lieutenant of Marines. And I went back up to Quantico for 31 weeks of intensive, it's called basic school. So I was a member of basic school 667. And after I finished basic school, they said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to be an infantry officer and I want to go to Vietnam. I volunteered for it. Sure enough, they said, okay. And they sent me to Vietnam. I went to join the 1st Marine Division, which was out of Da Nang. And they sent me down to the 5th Marine Regiment, and the 5th Marine Regiment sent me to the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines Hotel Company, which was based at An Hoa, Vietnam. And that first few months of my time there in An Hoa was mostly patrols, and very frequently we would do road sweep security, because the road from An Hoa up to Da Nang was always being mined by the communists because most of our supplies, artillery, rounds, and supplies would come in via truck. The Marines didn't have all the helicopters that the Army had. So road sweep security involved accompanying combat engineers who would use mine detectors, and it was a 5-mile stretch of road. And the first time probably this is about the third time my platoon, I had been assigned a platoon of 46 Marines I was in charge of. So about the third time my platoon was providing security for the combat engineers, about halfway or 3/4 of the way through our segment of the road that we were sweeping, we began to receive fire from a sniper who was about 200 meters off to our east in a copse of bamboo. He was hiding in the bamboo. So immediately we dropped to the muddy road, and my radio operator always accompanied me. He was always at my side. So he came up, Pete Adesso was his name. Adesso handed me the radio, and I called a fire mission on exactly where that sniper was. And I had been trained how to read maps precisely, because when you call artillery, typically you'll call the artillery within 200 meters of where you are. So you better know exactly where you are, or else you'll be dropping artillery on yourself. So I called in the coordinates of where the sniper was and where we were, and then within probably less than a minute, I heard the word from the artillery battery, shot, which means they've shot the guns. And I replied, shot out, and I said, incoming. So everybody put their heads down, and you could hear the shells come over us like ripping canvas, very loud. And they just tore up that hole. The first round hit right where that sniper was, and it just turned that whole forest or that copse of bamboo into toothpicks, really. It was churned up dirt and toothpicks. No more sniper rounds. So I raised my head up. All my guys were looking at me, all 46 of them, because I hadn't proved myself yet as a lieutenant. They didn't know if they could trust me or not. And I raised my head up and said in the most dramatic Southern drawl, I said, if my mama could see me now. And then they all started laughing and hollering. So I was their lieutenant from then on. So we continued the patrolling down at Anwa for maybe another month. And then all of a sudden we were told to move north and up to Fubai, which we did. It was they called it Operation Checkers, but we moved up and replaced a Marine unit that was north of Da Nang, between Da Nang and Fubai, which is north up Route 1. And our assignment was to guard the bridges on Route 1 because the communists were starting to try to overrun the Marine bases on the DMZ, demilitarized zone between North and South Vietnam, to our north. And so it was essential they receive supplies, mostly artillery rounds. So the communists would come in at night and try to blow up the bridges. So that's why we were guarding the bridges. And one night, they came in and tried to blow the bridge I was on, and we caught them before they were able to lay the charges. And it was a pretty good fight till sunrise. But we won. They didn't blow the bridge. And when the relief company came in to relieve us, and the sun came up, there were 22 dead North Vietnamese bodies out in front of my position. So I was able to call artillery and direct machine gun fire, right? They were coming at us and we stopped them. That same day, another rifle company came in and relieved us, and we boarded trucks and went up to Fubai, which was about maybe 10 kilometers north of us. And when we got into Fubai, it was a big base, and there was no huts that were available for us to sleep in, so we had to sleep on the dirt in front of the company office. And we dug holes, fighting holes, because they were getting shelled at night. And we got steaks and fresh uniforms. And right away in the Marine Corps, if they treat you nice and you get a steak and a new uniform, something bad is about to happen. So that next morning we got a briefing, real quick briefing, and it said we're going up to Hue, H-U-E, the old imperial capital of Vietnam. So we got up there, we get on the trucks and we're heading north, and everybody's all excited because they heard the stories of Hue, how elegant. They have elegant French cafes out on the boulevards. You can sit and sip your coffee and have, pastries, French pastries, and it's just an elegant lifestyle. Much different than the grass huts and the stinky jungle that we've been fighting in. My Marines were all excited as we pulled out of the gate on Phu Bai and got on Route 1 going north. And less than a quarter of a mile up, there were several villages totally empty. And the guys were talking about, oh yeah, and the girls are so beautiful. They all wear abdais and it's just a great, fun place to be. All of a sudden, all that talk stopped because we passed several military vehicles that had been blown up, and the charred bodies, I don't know if they were South Vietnamese or Americans, but they were laying there in the dirt. No villages. The kids would typically come out and beg food and candy from the Marines, and the Marines would throw the candy to the kids, and they'd all laugh and everything. But not one soul was to be seen on this trip up to Hue. As we got into Hue, we had to cross a canal and a bridge, and all of a sudden, firing came at us from both sides of the road, and the truck drivers automatically sped up, and we pulled into the American compound, the last American holdout, called the MACB compound, which was the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. That's where all the advisors were stationed that were working with the South Vietnamese Army. There were no American, there were some South Vietnamese, but no American military units stationed in Hue, just that compound. So we unloaded from our trucks in that compound. And all of a sudden, the company commander, Ron Christmas, called me over and he said, Lieutenant, or Mike, he called me Mike, Mike, I want you to take your platoon and cross the street and get into the next block and work your way through the block to the next street and halt. Now, mind you, I had received very little training in urban combat, which was totally different than jungle fighting. So we ran across the street, and all of a sudden, we ran into the University of Hue in the lobby area, the main entrance. And if you can imagine 46 hyped up Marine teenagers with weapons, with automatic weapons, M16, we all had M16s. It's a recipe for chaos, recipe for disaster. So then I said, well, we're going to work in small units, and the smallest unit you've got in a rifle platoon is the fire team. 4 men, fire team leader and three Marines. And typically they'll have another Marine attached that's got the Blucher, the M79 grenade launcher. And so we worked in fire teams. That was the best way to clear these buildings. And what you'd do is you'd run through the building, and every room you came to, you'd pull out an M26 hand grenade and toss it in the room, lean up against the wall, and the walls were all stone walls, very, very heavily built French colonial buildings. So you can measure our progress by the explosions ahead of us. We'd throw the grenades ahead of us to discourage any North Vietnamese that were hiding, who was going to try to catch us. So this kind of fighting continued both day and night. And I can remember at night, there was a North Vietnamese soldier who spoke very poor English, but he used to yell obscenities at us across the street. When my Marines would respond to him, I said, don't respond because you're giving up your location. Be quiet. So anyway, we entered the city on the 2nd of February, And it took us 6 days to move 6 blocks. That's how difficult it was, really intense. And Hue was a city at that time, I think, of 120,000 people. It was the second biggest city well, Hanoi was the biggest, I think, and then Saigon, and now Hue. But Hue was the cultural hub of Vietnam before it was even occupied by the French. That's where the emperor lived in Vietnam. So it was had been an open city, and there had been no fighting in it till this time. So on the 11th of February, 1968, I was lined up with my platoon on a street. We were hiding behind a wall, and the company commander said, "I want you to take that building across the street. That's your objective." So what we would do is we would charge across the street in little fire team groups, and then support each other, cover each other with fire, by shooting at anybody that shot at us. I looked over the wall, and there was a Catholic church. And I, having been a seminarian and having grown up in the Catholic Church and at the Cathedral of Christ the King, I felt a little uneasy about running into the Catholic Church to kill people and blow things up. But I was a Marine officer, so I did what I was told to do. So by this time, I was down to 20 effective Marines. I'd gone from 46 down to 20 effective. And this was the 11th of February, so then we come in on the 2nd of February. So I ran across the street, and I ran into the narthex of the church with a fire team. They ran up to the altar and started looking for enemy soldiers hiding behind the altar, looking on the benches, behind the organ, that kind of stuff. And I'm standing there back in the narthex and listening to them, and they shout at each other, and they recognize each other's voice. So they say, "It's clear over here, clear over there." So I'm standing back there watching them work back toward me, and I happen to look over my left shoulder, and there is a doorway that we overlooked in the excitement of running into the narthex. So I looked around, there's nobody left to send to check out the doorway, so, I checked it out. So I got over to the doorway and saw it was a set of stairs that went down under the church, parallel to the inside wall of the church, and then turned right and went further down. And later I found out it was the crypt of the church, underneath the church. I stepped down to that first step, took my M16, put it on safe, and stuck it under my arm, reached into my flak jacket pocket, and pulled out an M26 grenade in my right hand, took my left finger, index finger, and stuck it into the ring, and didn't pull yet, walked down to the steps, and just above the landing, I began to put pressure on that ring to pull it out. And once you pull the ring out, the only thing that's keeping it from blowing up is the safety lever. So I began to ease that pin out, and all of a sudden, now mind you, I had been fighting for 7 days, constant combat, very little sleep. So I was just working on energy and training, that's it. A lot of adrenaline. And so in my mind, I was saying, I'm going to toss this thing down the stairs and blow up whatever's down there, and then go down and shoot whatever's left. It's still moving. And assuming that it was filled with North Vietnamese soldiers. Out of the dark, a hand comes out very gently and lays over the top of my hand, of both my hands. So I'm sitting there with my finger in the ring of the grenade in the right hand, putting pressure on that pin to pull it out. And all of a sudden, a deep peace settles over me. The anxiety and the adrenaline sort of dies away, and a peace settles over me. And I didn't even think about it. I pushed that pin back in, flattened the cotter keys, stuck the grenade back in my pocket, stepped down to the landing, and I don't even think I took my M16 off safe. But I looked down the stairs ahead of me, and there in the dark of the crypt were lighted vigil lights, candles. And in the glow of the candles were women and children saying the rosary. And I still, I think Mary's peace was over me by this time. I told him in my fractured Vietnamese, I said, Lai Dai, told him to come upstairs. And I led him up, because if I had to send him up ahead of me, my Marines would have shot him. So I led him up and handed him off to one of my corporals, who made sure they got back to the refugee center, where they were safe. And immediately I got a call from the company commander, and he said, Mike, we're in contact behind the church. Move your platoon. So we gathered up all our stuff and took off, and we were in intense combat. And this was the seventh day of the battle. We were in that battle, in Hue, for 26 straight days. 3 or 4 days later, I got wounded by shrapnel. Wasn't bad. I didn't even realize I was hit until one of my men said, Lieutenant, you're hit, you're bleeding. So they put me on a helicopter, flew me down to Phu Bai, cut the stuff out. And about the 5th day, the first sergeant came to me. Uragus was his name, Top Uragus, very intimidated. Although he was only about probably 5'8" or whatever, but he had a long black handlebar mustache. He did typical Marine first sergeant. And he comes to me in the hospital, and I'm laying there clean, well fed, on clean sheets, in clean pajamas. And he says, Lieutenant. I said, hey, Top. He says, you're the last officer in the company, right? I said, no, I didn't know that. He said, everybody else has been medevaced out of country. You're our last officer. He didn't say anything else. I said, right away, I said, yeah, well, I got to go back. So I jumped out of the hospital, snuck out actually. He had my uniform in the Jeep. And I hopped on a helicopter and went back into Hue and stayed the rest of the battle. A very intense battle. The historians say it was the bloodiest battle of the Vietnam War. The casualty rates were incredible. I don't know what the numbers are. I know the North Vietnamese presence, the North Vietnamese attacked Hue with 30,000 troops. We went into Hue, the Marines did, with 6 understrength rifle companies. A rifle company is 230 men. So probably 1,200 Marines, if that. And we were the only ones in the city fighting the enemy. And we learned urban combat very quickly, because if not, we would have been overrun. After I got out of the Marine Corps and I came back to Atlanta and I was working, I began to watch these documentaries on Vietnam. And a lot of stuff started to come out. And I began to have nightmares, PTSD. And I hadn't had them at all before, but I'd wake up in the middle of the night and Peggy would say, talk to me, tell me about what's going on. And a lot of it revolved around the Battle of Hue. So my son Burns, he said, Dad, I understand you're having trouble. I said, yeah, I've been having these terrible nightmares about Hue. And he said, there's a priest in New Orleans who's got the gift that John Vianney and Padre Pio had. He can read your soul in confession. I said, oh, I think we may need to go down to see that priest. So I loaded whatever kids were at home, I loaded them in the car. I think we were living in Thomaston at the time. I loaded them in the station wagon. I said, we're going down to New Orleans. Oh, yay! I said, we're going to church and going to confession. I don't want to go. I said, get yourself in the car. So we drove down there and lined up for Saturday confession. I hadn't talked to Father at all. And I was the last one, or one of the last ones, in the confession line. And the kid said I was in there about 45 minutes. I made a complete confession, a general confession of everything of my life I could remember. I did a good examination of conscience on the drive down there. And finally, after I said, Father, that's about all I can think of. And he said, is there anything bothering you? And I said, yes, Father. He said, about Vietnam? I said, yes, Father. He said, do you mean about the church in Hue? And I said, yes, Father. And he said, that was the Blessed Mother's hand that stopped you from throwing that hand grenade and killing those people. Just like that. He didn't know me from Adam's house cat.
No.
Now let me tell you what happened about 8 months ago. I was at I got a Purple Heart in Hue, and I was combat wounded, and I was at a meeting of our local chapter of the Purple Heart, and this middle-aged Vietnamese guy comes in and stands in the back of the room, and after the meeting he comes up to the front and he said, was anybody here, and these were all mostly Vietnam veterans, was anybody here in the Battle of Hue? And I was the only one to raise my hand. And he said, let's talk. So we started talking, went out and got a cup of coffee. And he said, I was a 12-year-old boy during that battle.
Wow.
And I can remember hiding in the basement of our house in the Phu Cam district where I was. The Phu Cam was on the south side of the Perfume River. The Citadel's on the north, and the south side of the river is the Phu Cam districts. And I was laying there and looked out the window we had in the basement. When I saw the Marines coming down the street, I knew we were safe. I said, that's pretty cool.
That's great.
And he said, my wife is also from Hue. So I said, well, let's have our wives meet. So we went to dinner. The two couples went. And during the course of the meal, his wife, Anna, really a beautiful woman, she told us she was a 4-year-old child hiding in the basement of the Phu Cam Cathedral, and it was with her mother and her aunt. They were and she can remember, or her mother told her about the smelly Marine at the top of the stairs that said in his terrible Vietnamese, "Like die," and we were safe.
That's an amazing.
Yeah, Anna.
Oh
Yeah.
So war is hell.
Uh huh.
Inside of all of that, you had this miracle away.
That's right.